Hopevale podcast. I'm Tamara Schlatter, the Bay City Campus Director, and I'll be your host as we continue our current sermon series, Crooked Sticks. We're exploring how God uses imperfect people to draw straight lines and build his family. Today, I'm joined by Pastor Josh as we continue the story of Jacob's family in the book of Genesis. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I always ask as many people as I can questions for the podcast, try and get feedback from the congregation. Yeah. So last night I asked my daughter, I'm like, what were your thoughts about the message? Do you have any questions? And she immediately was like, I really loved the detail about the spices that Joseph's brothers were bringing to him. And it's the same spices that the Ishmaelites were carrying when Joseph was sold off into slavery. So what a neat little detail. And she wanted to know if there was more there that you could share about the spices. But first, my thought was honestly like, oh, maybe I should have paid better attention in high school English, like imagery, foreshadowing, all of this stuff that I thought was useless actually is real tools for studying the Bible. So any high school students out there listening, pay attention in English class. It does matter.
I think, I don't have tons more to extrapolate on it, but I would say even as we are in this story too, there's things that we use in English, like you mentioned of foreshadowing or whatever, but there's also this reality of it's important to remember the genre that we're in right now, and the book of Genesis and the most of the Old Testament, it's not written in a there's obviously history a part of it, but like how we would write history today. And so it's easy for us to just kind of read in that light of like, oh, okay, they grabbed, they were going on a trip, they grabbed their stuff or they packed their spices or whatever, and we just kind of move on. Yeah. But a way that some people talk about this type of literature is that it's meditation literature. And so it actually is designed for you to kind of like sit with it and stew over it. And so that is actually how you find some of these things, and it's actually incredible because our biblical authors are literally, they're just so smart, and they do amazing work of like tying in all these things, and you start to see how there's layers to the stories that they're presenting. Now, I would want to provide like a little bit of caution, because sometimes people can run in these like wild directions and they make the story mean something that didn't, and so there is some guardrails that we have to incorporate as we read along with our the long faith tradition of our brothers and sisters who've helped us. But to that point, to your daughter's point but that is the beauty of like sitting in a story for week after week, and that is the beauty of like paying attention to the words. And so even when you do your own devotion time or whatever, a lot of times, if you go to a Bible school or whatever, like what they'll teach you is to like list out different words and to see how many times words are used and all those sorts of things. So I would encourage anybody, and the beautiful thing now is like it's so easy for us because we have the internet, and you can literally enter in a keyword and you can go to different websites and you can grab the Greek word and it will show you all the places that it's used, and so then you can see the different content, you know what I mean? So like you don't need to do all of this sort of stuff necessarily. So it's not like you have to do this to fully understand what's going on, but that is part of the beauty of gathering together and having someone who's like teaching and studying and prepping it, right? Is that you can come with some of the stuff that it's like, you would, why would you really pay attention to that otherwise? But if you're going to sit with it, then there's like this deeper, and it really impacts the story too, right? Like it actually, it leads us to kind of like this central reality of what is happening in this story is Joseph has recreated this test literally from start to end. It's a replay of the very details that you could miss if you don't see it.
Yeah, and I think that's what keeps Scripture so interesting. There's just so many little details like that woven together that you've got to read it and go, this can't be made up.
Right.
There's no way. There's just too much detail, too much tying things together that this can't be made up.
Yeah, and I love that. And again, I just want to put embellish it a little bit more of like, and it just goes to show how amazing the authors were and like how much God was at work in and through them as they were writing and preparing and how to put this story together, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Awesome. So you didn't really actually elaborate on the spices themselves. Not much meaning there then?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know. I guess I didn't take it much further to go see if there is more meaning beyond why those specific spices or any of those sorts of things. But I think the point is that it is this callback to this is how you do business in that day and age, right?
Yeah.
And like we saw the Ishmaelites and they were doing it. So now this is how Jacob is encouraging his boys to go gain favor with Pharaoh and his household as they head down there. So
taking him things of worth to gain favor.
Yes, exactly. And we do that all the time. And that's common business practice, right? You create reciprocity and all this sort of like giving gifts and all of this sort of stuff. Same was happening back then.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Awesome. Well, one of the biggest emotional moments in this story is Judah stepping forward and offering himself in Benjamin's place. It's such a contrast to who he was earlier in the story. So how does Judah's willingness to take responsibility here show his maturity and growth as a leader?
Yeah, I think it is an entire flip of who he is, which I would want to just offer as encouragement to all of us, because Judah's he's a grown man. He's lived a good portion of his life. Because we learned that he doesn't go. He has all of his failures with Tamar and stuff, and that's years. That's after Joseph, and there's years there. So he's a middle-aged guy walking around, who has been very selfish, very crooked, very entitled, very self-preserving. And there's this radical transformation within him where he finally gets to this surrender moment, this breaking moment. But I think part of what I would want to say there is the beauty of the story is like God is always present and he's always at work and he's always inviting us into new things that he has for us, right? New wineskins that he has for us. His mercies are new every day. And so I think there's kind of a trope in our society that like, as you get older, you just kind of get stuck in your ways, sort of a thing. And my encouragement to all of us would be to reject that thinking. I don't think that's actually biblical thinking. I mean, on one hand, that greatly reduces who the Holy Spirit is and his ability to change and transform our hearts and minds. But even my very limited understanding of neuroscience would also say that just isn't true. It may be harder as you get older, but actually they'll talk about the way as you develop new habits and patterns, it actually there's this ability to even rewire your brain. And so this idea that we're stuck is, I think, more of just a choice that we decide that we want to make so that we can give ourselves outs. And I don't want to be that person, right? I don't think that we should be shooting for that. I want to say, like, let's look at Judah. He could have just continued to be who he was. And I think that's part of what Joseph is wrestling with is this the same person who sold me into slavery? I bet he probably is, but there's this grace and space that Joseph gives him to be able to, like, I think that's the other part too. Like the test is almost an act of grace and provides space for him to see if there's been change and transformation. And I would just push on that even for all of us. Like, how many times do we just shut people down because we're like, no, they can't change.
Right.
They can't. This is who they are. This is all of this different things. I mean, I even see it on social media all the time with air quotes here with spiritual leaders who go after different people in the public eye or politicians or whatever. And I was just listening to something yesterday, and it was just fascinating to have this whole story on my mind and seeing this grace in this space that's provided, and then listening to people who just aren't willing to give that to anyone. They're just like, nope, this whole group of people, they're just this way. And I was like, I don't think that's who we're called to be. I think we're called to be people who navigate, and it's tricky, but we got to figure out how to navigate allowing the Spirit of God to be at work and moving in people's lives. And so, but that's difficult work, but that's like worthy work. Like that's what we're actually after. I think it's what we actually want in our own lives, in our own hearts. Like there's a part of me that comes alive that like, I don't want to be boxed into a corner and held to, this is who you always are.
Right.
But then I have to be willing to allow space for that. So yeah, I think in all that you do see Judah's massive transformation. And then the big reveal of the entire story is the line of Jesus is going to come from him. Like he's the one that the kings are going to come from, because it is the act that God takes.
Yeah.
And I think to your question to the part of the question about leadership, I think that's what leadership actually is. The idea of how leadership gets talked about is helpful in some ways in today, but sometimes we kind of import that on the Bible in ways that aren't helpful. But what we see of Jesus is this is who he is. He's the one who picks up the rag and washes feet. He's the one who goes to the cross. He's the one. This is the action that God takes in a broken, messy world. And so that's what real leadership looks like. Yeah. Now we have to figure out how to contextualize that, and that looks different in a marriage than it does as a parent, than it does as a boss or an employee, or it looks different in all of these different places. But I think that's like the big arching umbrella that we're all under, or whatever it is, right? Like that's the direction that we're all supposed to be going, and figuring out how does that play in our lives.
So as you were talking about that and talking about people coming to a certain age and they're really saying, I am who I am. I'm not willing to change anymore. And it hit me, God's the one who says, I am who I am. Yet we're like robbing that and saying, I am who I am, but not in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of problems with it. Because we are constantly changing and growing, or at least we should be, right? And the trap for us all, and maybe the test that we face, is to think that we've arrived, right? Is to think that we have all of the knowledge. It always goes back to some of the smartest people I know in my life, they're just brilliant, are some of the least confident of their opinions that I know of. Meaning like they will be in a field of study where they have just years, like it would take me years to catch up. And they don't speak so confidently that this is 100% what this means, or how this is going to happen, or what would happen if we did X or whatever, right? Like there's this humility that comes along with even knowledge. And I think, again, if we just kind of go to our cultural moment, it's like we're kind of a inch deep, mile wide sort of like, well, I've thought about this topic for 30 seconds, so now I'm an expert, and I have this amazing expert opinion on things. And
you referenced that yesterday in the sermon about like coming to Thanksgiving dinner and that cousin that just knows everything. They're an economist.
And it always goes with whatever that's in the news that week. It's just amazing how. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be interested in those things, or we shouldn't be learning along. But I would want to use, again, that like a little bit more of a growth mindset of like also bringing some humility to that conversation. So there is this reality of I am always growing, and I am always maturing, and I am not God, right? Like he is the one who remains who he is. But there's always invitations into his kingdom. There's always invitations to be more like Jesus. And I think this is going to be a journey we're on throughout all of eternity. Like we're always going to be in this space of like continuing to learn and grow and develop in new skills or see new things or whatever. Like this carries on to like, it's not just, well, I know what I need to know and now I'm good, peace out sort of a thing. And I think I've had that mindset at different moments, or there's been in spaces where I've been in where even when it comes to Christianity, like that's kind of what you get handed in different spaces, is like, nope, this is it, and this is all there is to it, and then you just keep doing that same thing over and over again. And I don't think that's the case.
Well, I knew more 15 years ago than I know today.
Yeah, that's exactly it though, right?
Yeah, I think, when I first became a Christian, you're starting to understand things and put together the whole story. It was like, okay, I'm figuring this out. I got it. And now I'm going, wait, hold on. The deeper I go, the more I realize there's so much more to know.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, a silly example is, it's the person who doesn't have any kids who's an expert on being a parent.
Yeah.
You know, like, I would never let my kids, whatever it is,
Yeah.
you know, the common thing we talk about today.
How do you let your kids color on the walls?
Yeah. Well, just even like screen time and like bedtimes and what food they're going to eat. And, you know, we're going to be so disciplined. And then it's like you watch them have kids and you're like, oh yeah, how's that going for you? Like, but there's this sense of like, or you know, the other trope is like you're a teenager and you know everything, and then you get older and it's like, oh, it's more complicated than that, and it's more. There's some things that in life that are situational and that I have to figure out how to navigate because it's different with this kid than it is that kid. Or, you know.
Well, as a teenager, they're just starting to come into understanding of the world, but they don't really. It's that inch deep, mile wide kind of thing.
And I please don't hear me saying that's not a negative thing.
Right.
But we have to understand what it is.
Yeah.
So it is appropriate, you know, even as you share your part of your story of when you first start out in the Christian faith, that's appropriate for where you are on your development journey of like growing in those things. Or if whatever, you're going to learn an instrument, right? Like there's basic structures that you're going to think you're way better than you are because you think that playing just those 4 chords on a guitar makes you able to play all of these different songs. It's like, well, yeah, but there's more to it, right? And so please don't hear me saying like that's a negative thing, but what we do want to say is like, let's not limit ourselves there. Don't stop there. That's not all that there is to this.
Yeah,
So
I love that. So Judah's act of surrender becomes the turning point, but not just for him, but for the entire family. Generations of hurt, lies, jealousy, favoritism all begin to break in this moment. So what does it look like for us to surrender to God in a way that breaks unhealthy patterns in our own lives or our families?
Yeah, this is where we get into that situational piece of like, I think the overarching story is inviting us into understanding our lives fundamentally different than the rest of the world is set up to do. The rest of the world is set up to teach me that this life is about me, that I'm at the center of it, that every relationship is essentially how can I manage this relationship to get something out of it, whatever that means. That could be friendship, that could be monetary things, that could be a whole bunch of different things. And this story that I think is the gospel invites us into actually our whole faith is built on this act of surrender, that God is the one himself who comes and surrenders. And so then we extrapolate out and we go, okay, so what does that mean contextually for me? Like, how do I be that person? And I think it's designed. So we talked about this already, but so the story's written in this meditation literature, right? I think that's part of the call here is like, it's supposed to be something that we kind of chew on over and over again. And that is just kind of, it's just kind of present in our minds. I don't know that it's certainly not a do A so you get result B sort of thing. It is how does this question or this maybe this idea of Judah being the substitute offering, of being the one who surrenders himself, and that being the linchpin to the entire story, how does that impact how I enter in with my coworker right now? How does that impact how I enter in with my neighbor? And so I think it's this overarching call into living a different story than the rest of the world is telling me to live. And that's a hard space to be in some senses, because it's so second nature, right? It's like, you know, it's the old, it's explaining water to fish sort of a thing. Like, how do you even do that?
Yeah.
But I think that there's profound beauty in that. Now, I do want to be very clear. There are moments where we need boundaries in our life, right? So what I don't think that this is saying is that you're in a situation where you're constantly whatever, your rights or whatever are being violated in whatever sense that means. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you can still have have boundaries, you can still have good communication patterns, but there's still a way to go first in these situations. There's still a way to be the one who offers yourself and surrenders to your own things, right? And so, again, that's going to look different in a variety of situations. But like, let's say we have Thanksgiving coming up. So let's say you're gathering around the Thanksgiving table, and you know that you have someone. The family dynamic is that basically no one helps with anything, right? And so now the question becomes, okay, so what does it look like to be the one who surrenders? And maybe, so this is where there's infinite possibilities, and this is where you actually need the Spirit. I think the beauty of this whole thing is it's because it's not A plus B, it's actually designed to call you into life with the Spirit, right? And so it could be that it means the act of surrender is I get up and I'm the one who clears the table and does the dishes while everyone sits around. It could be that actually on the front end, you need to have a conversation with everyone after you've done that for a while, let's say, and maybe the conversation is now like, hey, we're planning on doing the dishes for the main meal. I'm wondering if someone else could help with, breakfast or whatever it is. You know what I mean? But like, I'm just trying to give imagination for it. There's no prescribed, like, you do this in this situation, but it's you. And this is the beauty of why the Christian life actually matters, because it's not just the static thing of I sit around the table and I just announce rules. It's like I'm literally living my life trying to figure out, how does this reality impact this moment, And so, again, kids are so easy for me to go to just because of my stage of life. But it's like sometimes with my kids, that means like the boundaries are strict and we hold to them. Sometimes there's moments where it's like, no, there's grace here, and we're going to change, and we're going to talk about that. And there's all of these invitations though, that the big picture call is that I am to be a person who lives as Jesus. I'm to be the one who's figuring out how to build the bridge, to fill in the gap, to extend the invite, to go first, to surrender in whatever context that may mean.
Yeah. I think that, while I was thinking about the last year in youth, our theme was the upside down kingdom, right? Everything is different than what the way the world prescribes it. And it's really insanity to keep trying the things of the world. We just keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. Isn't that the definition of insanity? And I think surrender looks like being willing to try something different. Not trying to say the same old patterns and do the same old thing and expect something different. And so being open, and like you said, that's really the process of prayer and paying attention to the Holy Spirit, and then just being open to that and trying something completely different than what you've always done before. And so maybe it is getting up and doing the dishes and surrendering your right to sit and relax with everybody. But then when you do the dishes, maybe don't grumble and slam them around so that everybody knows that you're doing the dishes.
But it's so easy in that situation too. Like, the family gets together, everyone's tired, everyone, people traveled in, or they're the ones hosting, so they're the ones who did all the work, and everyone's kind of wanting to enjoy the holiday. You know what I mean? So like, it just creates these dynamics. So then it's like, well, what does it mean to surrender in this moment?
So why do you think surrender so often feels like losing control?
I mean, my immediate response is I think because part of it is losing control, and I think part of it is we love control. So I think that's a really great question, because that's part of like part of us. I think even we want to be opportunists in the sense of like, well, if I surrender here and I do the dishes, then maybe later I can get somebody, you know what I mean? So like, it's just
always thinking what we're going to get out of it.
Yeah. It's like our operating system. And again, it's this default system that we fall into, part of it because the world teaches us, part of it because there is this, selfish desires within us, whatever it may be. And so again, that's part of like the Spirit rooting that stuff out in us. Right. And so I would want to acknowledge on the front part of why it feels like you're losing control is because that's totally what's happening. I think that's part of the definition of surrendering, but I think that's an important point to like embellish and to make us aware of. And so I think that even calls us into, so why am I surrendering, right? Like, and it does this heart motive check. And like, is it because I'm trying to get something out of it? Or is it because I genuinely love this person? Yeah. Or is it because I feel like, actually right now I really don't know that I do love this person, but I feel like the Spirit of God is inviting me into this action and he wants to do this work of shaping me and forming me, right? And so, yeah, I mean, even the whole idea of freedom, we have that operates at a couple different levels in our context, because we live in a country where there's freedom, and freedom is a high value, and praise God we have religious freedoms and freedoms to go and pursue things. But sometimes I think that devolves in a way that is unhelpful, where essentially what we do is we make our own autonomy, our own individuality the primary thing. Right. And that is new even in human history. That does not happen until after what we call the Enlightenment. And so there is a healthy reality, I think, of being followers of Jesus. Appropriate language is that he is Savior, but he is also Lord, or a different word I would use there is King. And so we're not used to kings. We're not used to being subject to different authorities. And I think there's something in us, at least speaking in our context as Americans, where we are kind of abrasive to that. But when it comes to the context of our faith, that's actually a good thing, right? Because we need the King to lead us. We need the Good Shepherd. We need the one who has the keys to life. And left to our own demise, left to our own, desires, there will be demise, sort of a thing. And so I do think part of following Jesus is this act of surrender. And if you're counting by the world's metrics, it might look like losing. So it might mean that my bank account doesn't get as big as it could or as the world tells me it should, but I'm operating by different metrics. Right. It might, by the world standards, I might be losing in the sense of I don't go on as many trips, or my weekends are given to, not self-indulgent things, but are actually involved in serving in different things in the community or at church, or I mean, it might look like actually my Sunday mornings look different than my neighbors, because I'm actually committed to a group of people that we're trying to figure out what does it look like to follow Jesus. Those are acts of surrender. And there is a loss of freedom in a sense, but it's actually where deep meaning comes from. So another way of saying this is there's things that I have surrendered as I have gotten older, and it depends on what we mean by the word freedom. So I have gotten married and I have kids. Well, these two realities have drastically impacted what we mean by freedom. I have way less freedom in my ability to just on a whim go hang out with somebody or go golfing or do all these things, because there's a million other things happening in my life. And so the question is, am I less free or am I more free? Well, it depends on what metric you're using. If you're using, am I less free in the sense of I have less time to go do other things, then yes. Have I personally, just on my own personal level, found way more meaning and satisfaction because I have surrendered those freedoms 1,000 times, a million times? I don't even know how to quantify that. But there's those same dynamics, right? Of like, yeah, surrendering. If you're going to count it as losing freedom by what the world means, then yeah, that's exactly what's happening. But if you're going to count it by the kingdom metrics is this is actually where you're dying to yourself and you're finding meaning and purpose and wholeness, and you're being restored to who God has called you in, who he's called you to be and what he's calling you into. And so in some senses, yeah, in my life, I have way less freedom than I've ever had in my life at this moment. But in some senses, I'm as free as I've ever been too.
Yeah. kind of sounds like you're describing a trust issue, really. I mean, when you're talking about kings and America was founded on revolting from a king who mistreated us. And so the people, went their own way, and we're used to people abusing their authority. Maybe. And so we have a lack of trust, and maybe that's part of the difficulty in surrendering to God, is a lack of trust that his way is ultimately the better way, and that he does have good plans for us, and he does have good things for us. And that when I choose to surrender to him, it's actually going to be for my own benefit.
I 1000% agree. And that's a very real obstacle, for all of us, like you bringing up, we revolt against the king. So that's part of our story, right? And part of our value. And there's parts of that are really good and helpful, because leaders should not be abusing people, right? And all of that sort of stuff. But then we see it even in our world with maybe different leaders or institutions. Like we live at this moment where institutional trust is really down low, because we found out that a bunch of people who we put on pedestals weren't living up to it, right? And so that's for sure baked into all of this. And it doesn't make it easy, but it is the call to, but how do we live faithfully to Jesus being king, even in a world where there are leaders who at times are going to disappoint us, or we're going to lose trust in, or all of those sorts of things, because he is the one who has the keys, again, to life and life to the full, and flourishing and vitality and wholeness and healing. So I think that's absolutely it. And we sit in these moments of these very real tensions, these overarching tensions of who we are as a people and the stories that we are living out because of like the story we live in because of the different realities we're a part of. And then you have that not only as like those of us living in America, but then you have it within different communities that we're a part of, and different leaders we've experienced there, and all of those sorts of things. So I think that is 100% the case. But my call to everyone would be, those are things that we should pay attention to and be aware of, and we're for sure being shaped by. But the call is to figure out how do you follow Jesus faithfully, or trust him in a way that you actually make him king, because it is going to lead to all of those things that you actually want in your life, right?
Yeah, and we've been studying kings in youth, and so at the very beginning, God tells the people, you don't want a king, because kings will do what kings do, and they will abuse you, and they will use you for their own benefit. And so we've been hammering this story home, but the people were like, no, we want a king. We want to be like everybody else, and we want a king. And they rejected God as their king. And then that's exactly what happened. The kings did what they wanted to do. And so we really shouldn't be surprised by this abuse of power and authority, because God warned us of that from the very beginning. And we see that in scripture, but he is faithful. And if we look at the whole of the story, and again, that's what we've been doing in youth, is kind of zooming out from that and seeing God's faithfulness over and over, saying, come back to me, come back to me. I will be your God. I will lead you to the right places. And he's just constantly doing everything he can. He's sending prophets, trying to tell them like, hey, I'm here. I'm still here. And they keep rejecting him. It's just amazing. And then ultimately he sends Jesus to say, hey, I'm still here. I'm still willing to do all of these things for you. And so last night even, we laid it out on the board, all of the things God does for us and all of the expectations on us. And it's really not a very fair equation. God does everything. And so for those who are lacking trust, like, just go back in the story and look, he's proven his faithfulness over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that temptation to make ourselves king of the story, or to find someone else. Like, we are looking for someone to lead us in some sense of the word. And so the question is are we gonna submit to Jesus as the one who is the king?
Yeah. So going back to the story, Judah offers himself as a substitute. Joseph chooses forgiveness instead of revenge. Together, these two responses paint a powerful picture. So how does the combination of Judah's sacrifice and Joseph's forgiveness give us a fuller picture of the gospel and ultimately point us to Jesus, the true Lion of Judah?
Yeah, I mean, it is a powerful moment in the story, because it is the fullness of the gospel. I think it's the moments that we find ourselves in, so it's very relatable in that sense of we can imagine being Joseph because we've been Joseph. We've been the one who's been hurt, violated, wronged, and we're skeptical, right? Like we just talked about how we're skeptical of authorities. And we've also been Judah at moments where we've looked at our lives, and for a lot of us, the moments that we replay over and over are the ones where we failed, right? Where we didn't live up to even who we wanted to be. And we're wondering, is there still room or space to come back from this? Or maybe we've done something to a family member or friend, right? Where we said a harsh word, or we had an action that has caused turbulence in the relationship. And so I just think they're both, like, this moment in the story is so relatable because we've worn both of those hats. We've sat in both of those chairs. We probably right now are simultaneously sitting in both of those chairs, depending on what relationship we're talking about. And so I think it's the reminder, if you find yourself in Judah's chair, that there is still time to change. There's that growth ability. There is that way of laying down, surrendering, sacrificing, actually can bring healing and restoration. And maybe it won't for everybody in the story, but it can for you. And then there's the flip side of that. There's being Joseph and being skeptical that he's changed, and maybe wanting to withhold the grace, or feeling like you're entitled to hold on to that and you don't have to extend that. And just remembering, like, you've also been Judah at moments, and you needed someone who gave you grace and who allowed you the space to change, and it maybe took you time in your own journey. And so if you needed that, then so does whoever it is in your life, or the person you encounter tomorrow, right? Like, so I think it's this powerful reminder that if we have fallen short, that we can confess and we can surrender. And if we find ourselves in a position where someone else is confessing or trying to figure out what it looks like for them to surrender, that we can give grace and create space for them. And I mean, that sounds to me like, man, if you had that in a biological family unit, that would be amazing, right? And if you had that in, let's extend that out to the people of God, to a church community, that would be amazing. Yeah. And so that's, I mean, I'm always called, this is why I love who we are as Hopevale, because that's who we're trying to figure out, what does it look like for us to be. We say it, we're a community of grace and truth. Trying to figure out how do we invite people to know and follow Jesus. And so that really is what does it look like to surrender, and what does it look like to give space and grace? And it's this constant tension. It's not static. I know it's so easy to put boxes up on a white erase board sort of thing. That's not how it really works. It looks more like the story of Judah and Joseph and these dynamics, and then we're replaying that over and over, and we're trying to figure out how do we faithfully do this in our lives. And so that's the power and the beauty, I think, of the entire story. It really does come down to this moment, this chapter, because now we're going to see that launches the family to be able to go out and to move forward and to not be stuck in those old cycles and wounds. And that's, I would say, even my prayer and hope for us as a church. Like, we'll continue to walk in that space. And it's messy in there because we're all broken. And again, I want to press down, double click on whatever. We're all Judah at moments. We're all Joseph at moments. It's not just be one or the other. It's figuring out where we're at in the story and how do we calibrate both of those things to be able to continue to grow in our life and to invite people to do the same.
Yeah, someone once told me, if you're not feeling the tension of grace and truth, then you're probably not doing it right. You know, like we want to lean one way or the other, but in most situations, because we're people and we're messy, there's a tension that needs to be found, and you need to be able to sit in that tension and be, diligent to make sure that you're pursuing both.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
you're gonna. I heard it on the radio this morning on my way in. I wasn't quite paying attention, but they said you'll find whatever it is that you seek. So we need to be people that are seeking both grace and truth, and we need to be seeking God, and we'll find God, or we can be Judah and focus on the mistakes, and that's what we'll see. We'll see our mistakes, or we can see an opportunity to extend grace and extend forgiveness. So, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think, I love this chapter. I love, this story was always handed to me in a very different way. We never included the Judah part. We just only talked about Joseph. So it's fun to get to walk through that as a church. And I'm excited we're going to have our last week coming up here and just seeing how does this move the family forward and what is next for them. And I think it's going to be the call for all of us to keep living as a part of that family. So,
awesome. I'm excited to wrap it up on Sunday. So I hope you'll join us next week as we continue this journey. We'll see you all then.